hello, and welcome to the Asian American Forward podcast. I'm excited today because we have two guests. We have Matthew Ward and Yin Lin, who are co-founders of the AAPI Democracy Project. And we're really excited to talk with you guys today, Matthew and Yin. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And of course, joining me as usual is my co-host, Don Sun. Hi, Don.
Hi, Katie. Hi, guest.
So I want to give Matthew and Yin an opportunity to kind of introduce ADP to the audience and kind of tell us about what your goals are, because you're a relatively new organization. So if you guys want to give us like the background story and sort of tell us a little bit about what ADP hopes to achieve.
Sure. I'll start with just introducing the origin story of the organization, and Matt can go deeper into the strategy for where we're headed. So, when the Atlanta spa shooting happened, it really hit me in my core. And, especially the recording of the woman, having a hard time communicating with the 911 operator really resonated with my experience, especially with my mom, who, despite being in this country for 30 plus years, still doesn't speak English fluently. We wanted to do something that would address these issues and cases of violence in a structural way that would last beyond the moment in the national press, which we've already seen, dissipate, unfortunately. And so, that's why we created ADP, and ADP is really focused on both increasing AAPI representation in government and increasing AAPI voter turnout in key districts where we are seeing an explosion in Asian American populations.
Yeah, and to pick it up from there, when we talk about structural power for minority groups in America, there's really only three doorways that can happen through: legislative, judicial, and electoral. Action is how ultimately laws get made and change gets instituted. In our case, we've chosen electoral action as the doorway we want to walk through. It is perhaps the fastest way to create immediate impact on the ground and in our executive and legislative branches. So ADP is specifically designed to create voter mobilization, like what Ian just said, by instituting a internal conversation within the specific cultures that make up that acronym, that pan-ethnic, pan-cultural acronym, by starting with really what is seen to be the foundational asset for this moment. Younger people are now finally getting engaged, feeling broadly welcomed, really on the cultural left, to voice their opinions, their political opinions, in defense of their communities. So we're really seizing that new younger generational enthusiasm, and we're taking that and we're trying to have an internal conversation with an older generation to create a maximal level of voter turnout within targeted races across the country that we feel will be consequential to outcomes that will dictate the majority for power for parties in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. Those are the two levels that we're primarily going to be focusing on. The counties are going to include, and this will be perhaps no surprise to your listeners, Maricopa County, that encompasses Phoenix in Arizona, Dallas County, of course, Dallas, Harris County, which is the majority of Houston, Miami-Dade, and Mecklenburg County, that is Charlotte. And those cities and those counties and those states are all very consequential, both to a state-level gubernatorial U.S. Senate map, but also to a presidential map. So the two different ways that we're going to engage is through what we call in the sort of electoral political profession hard side candidate engagement. So that's direct candidate committee engagement in the form of technical support and direct financial support through bringing donor networks to bear to help these candidates, but also technical services support for helping campaign organizations build out effectively so that they can actually create wins. In terms of the API voter mobilization, to date, APIs by population in these districts, when I say population, likely voter turnout population, have been seen in relatively small numbers. If properly mobilized, they would effectuate a margin of victory in close races. Close races being defined as congressional races coming in between the 15 and 20,000 vote margin in a general election contest. Could be offset by 8 to 10,000 votes if the API voters in that district were properly mobilized and turned out. With the U.S. Census now coming out and telling us that there are explosions of potential voters and perhaps active voters, and the research needs to be done in the counties that I mentioned. The API vote can move from just being a potential margin difference making vote to actually being a chunk of these candidate pathways. So that's what our work is in the short term with 2022. And certainly we'll be doing a lot of the same work in 2024. There is also that term that a lot of your listeners are very familiar with, which is the super PAC. And the super PAC traditionally has a lot of negative connotations around it. It is a vehicle for special interests to move in and to create a louder voice than the voter, the individual voter has. And as a consequence, their voice gets shut out and the voices of these special interests gets propelled, right? That's the typical perception, and it's not entirely wrong. Super PACs are just a tool. They're just a vehicle, and they can be used for positive impact. And in this case, ADP will take on super PAC work, which in the electoral world we call soft side work, and support API voter turnout and candidates from that perspective. So that's really what ADP is about. Ultimately, all this campaign work, all this impact, like where does it go? Like how does it translate? And it really translates to the next step, which is legislative action. So these newly minted candidates, now elected officials, they need to take up their mandate at that point, recognize how they got into office, and start passing laws that will full circle come back to creating safety in the short term for Asian Americans on the streets of our cities. Coming from New York, we saw a lot of attacks happen here, and then in the long term, we want to see actual laws passed that will create much more conditions of equality. It's kind of a sociological term, but basically that's the type of workforce protections that you see with what's termed the bamboo ceiling in the professional workforce, right? But also in terms of financial mobility and healthcare access and so on and so forth for many Asian American communities that are at or below the poverty line. So that's our long-term goal, is to actually translate this into policy, into legislative action. But that is another version of ADP.
Thank you, Matt. I think you jump in pretty deep understanding. Most audience, they try to very hard to understand. And my follow-up question to you and only, is for your professional experience. I have been in the voter registration for Asian American for like 15, 20 years. The efficiency is very, very low. So it's people hated to register. They think it's not related. So what's the ADP have a uniqueness compared with the other organization like API voters, all those kind of voter registration organization? What's uniqueness, and also link to your personal experience, how you qualified, and what's your uniqueness and ADP uniqueness to drive the next round election, like 2022 and 2024?
Yeah, for sure. So just a little bit of background on myself. So I'll kind of tackle that question backwards then forwards. So I've been working in national democratic politics for over a decade, originally out of California, where I did both statewide and municipal work, San Francisco mayor, LA City Council, California statewide elected constitutional office, statewide insurance commissioner. And then I moved to New York, and I've been doing New York City politics for over a decade, but then I started doing national work in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Michigan, a lot of time in Michigan. And during that time, I started working heavily in Black and Brown communities, inner city, and had to deal with a lot of disillusion and disengagement. And I've had to work to figure out theories of change within these communities to help mobilize those voters to come out and be effective in creating electoral impact and ultimately policy change. So I've seen a lot of success. I've seen a lot of failure, and I've learned from a lot of that over the years. And I've been able to bring a lot of that theory and a lot of that practical experiences to the table for the API vote. And historically, the API vote, has been disengaged, and I think that'll come as no surprise. So part of the task of ADP and API a vote, and organizations like this run API. That's another one. We've all been trying to tackle a solution to how do you increase API voter turnout. What ADP has done, I think, is unique. To answer your initial question, is I think that we've really kind of seized the moment that there is this newfound younger API generational engagement now. They care, but they need more direction. They need to be operationalized and put in the field and taught how to be activists, taught how to organize on the ground. Also, you see a lot of younger API money, individuals that have become quite successful, willing to give to 501c3, issues, but also to political causes as well. And we're very excited to definitely put that to use and make that return on their investment. So I think that is how we're different. I think we're bringing to the table perhaps sort of the best techniques that the Democratic Party is using right now to create multi-channel communications programs, to create voter activation where none exists, actual democratic instincts, right? Instilling those, teaching those for the first time. And we're doing it in a very timely way by harnessing a younger generational engagement.
Yeah, Matt, I think that's like also so right on the money based on like my own experiences that I've had getting more politically engaged in the last year through this podcast. But I kind of want to turn the question to Yin a little bit. I, interestingly enough, also in my other life as a public radio reporter, have been kind of working on a story about this artist who was also inspired by the Atlanta shootings to kind of start a public art project kind of as a response to that and the media coverage around it, how she felt like it was leaving out some things. But I'm really curious, Yin, as someone who's kind of come from an entrepreneurial background, why kind of politics was your response to this event, and if you could sort of like walk me through your thought process a little bit there.
Sure. We actually, I've had this conversation with a lot of friends of mine who come from a similar background, immigrants, Asian Americans who've worked hard, did all the right things, went to all the right schools and got all the right jobs. And I think there is this awakening that, we're realizing that that's all not enough. And that the only way to create true safety and equality for us in this country is through our government. And despite growing up in a household where we never talked about politics, voting was a non-issue, we were in survival mode for most of my upbringing. We had a family restaurant that I spent almost all of my hours at after, school. And so it wasn't it wasn't something that we even had headspace for at home. But now, I do have that privilege and I do have that ability to have these conversations and to engage. And I realize that it's my responsibility and I need to in order to create a better, next generation for my future family. And so, we've seen other high profile folks come out with similar narratives. A partner at Goldman Sachs in New York came out and said the same thing and started having internal conversations within his company about why this is so important. And there's a big VC out in the West Coast who said, very similar things. And so it's not an uncommon, theme that's popping up in a lot of folks in my generation of thinking about what the next step is and what can we actually do to create real change that is lasting.
Mm-hmm. So besides the Atlanta shooting, was there a moment where you were like, oh, politics really matters and this is something that I need to be a part of?
Yeah, so I also worked on a citywide campaign for a good friend of mine, Reshma Patel, who ran for comptroller. And she's always been a big influence to me in being more civically engaged. And then pair that with Matt's background and experience and really hearing about the work that he did in the Black and Brown community and how they've been able to mobilize as a community and how, their barrier to progress a lot of times has been a lack of resources and a realization that the Asian American community, frankly, has all the resources that it needs to create this change. We just haven't mobilized it and haven't engaged it. Mm-hmm. And that I saw as both, an opportunity to capture on this moment and also just a deeper understanding of how the system works through these direct experiences really pushed me to work on this.
Don, you're muted.
Sorry, my question is to either of you, and because it's in you focused on the next generation. For me, I think I'm older generation, but I think it's during the Andrew Yang's campaign, a lot of young gang is the next generation. But when the election day approach, we see the data after the polling, after the election, is the most the voter tasted their vote. It's still senior people. So it's the when ADP designed the strategy and focused on the next generation API community, what's the message or way we can turn the passion of young people into action instead of they tend to attending to the rally, but they don't go to the booth. So it's how we can overcome this hurdle.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is developing these democratic instincts, right? The act of voting, registering, then actually going to the ballot or getting an absentee ballot and then sending it back. That process it's a new process if they've never done it before. And so our job is to get them to do that at a young age so that they can develop that habit for many, many years to come. And, one of the ways that I think we need to address that is speaking to young folks in the channels in which they communicate, so the TikToks and Instagram channels of the world and leveraging influencers who have an engaged community that trusts what they say and care about what they say and using them as spokespeople and ambassadors to our mission. And I think, secondly, it's getting younger voters engaged in giving to campaigns. And that's something that we're really focused on with our digital fundraising platform that we're building out to serve as a GoFundMe for candidates, which will both be a discovery platform and a place for early seed money for a lot of these campaigns, which if they don't have that, they don't have a campaign. Yeah. And so that platform will be really focused on driving digital marketing strategies and converting folks into donors that are taking action And I think that even if they're low dollar donors who are giving, even $5 a month, if we can engage them and get them to take action, we can start to build on that and convert them into voters in the long run. So for us, it's really focusing on what that funnel looks like and what that conversion of action looks like, and what are the strategies that are most effective in driving that action.
Good. I like the digital campaign, and during the last cycle of presidential, both Bernie Sanders and Andrew, even Peter Buttigieg, we raised a lot of money from small dollars. My last question to Matt is in your political past experience, which candidate you support you think is the most fun?
For this coming 2022 midterm?
In the past, I think you have been working for the Kamala Harris, right? And some other the people who you think is the most interesting people you work with.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the win that I was probably the most excited about was Gretchen Whitmer's statewide gubernatorial in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And Jimmy Gomez's special congressional win in 2017 in downtown LA probably stand out for me as being singularly important for my career. I think that kind of taking a step back, I think that the Tish James Attorney General win, which I did a super PAC for in New York City, was also very, very special. And this most recent candidate, Reshma Patel, was fantastic as well. She definitely was a groundbreaking candidate. I mean, very, very happy with how well she did for a first timer, for sure. So yeah, those are my experiences.
Thank you.
You've got quite the rap sheet there, Matt. It's like we're just name dropping everyone.
Yeah, well, I mean, you do it for 10 years, and for all your listeners, I've lost a lot more than I've won, but that's true for most guys who do what I do. But we all have a few that we're pretty stoked about that ended up winning. So.
Well, we'll certainly be looking forward to 2022 to see what you guys are up to. Maybe we can check in again, but we are probably about out of time for today. So I want to thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And Don, of course, thanks as usual.
Always enjoy the people in political field. We always have things to share and to learn and to talk about. It's just so fun.
He loves to talk shop. I have to hold him back.
It's fun.
My name is Katie Simpson. Our podcast is sponsored by Asian American Forward. You can visit our website at www.asianamericanforward.com. If you enjoyed this show this week, have a question or a topic you'd like to hear us discuss on a future episode, you can email us at info@asianamericanforward.com. We would love to hear from you. You should also subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more conversations between Don and I. If you're a fan of the show, leave us a review in the Apple Podcast Store or tell someone about us. It really helps people find the show. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.
Bye. Thank you.